Fellas, 2025 has not been a good year for undefeated UFC fighters, so we're going to be going through every UFC fighter that was undefeated to lose in 2025 and every remaining one left. And we'll go in there with Bo Nickel. Bo Nickel obviously had a massive wrestling background before his MMA career, got one win on the regional scene, followed up by 2 straight wins in the contender series to win himself a UFC contract, where he went 4-0 in the UFC until he was booked against Rainer Derrida and got butchered by Rainer Derrida, and he lost his out at UFC Des Moines on Saturday, May 3rd. Peyton Talbot went 5-0 on the regional scene, got a decision win on the contender series, followed up by finishing his UFC debut, destroyed Cameron Simon to go 8-0, knocked out Yanis Gamore, and then as a massive favourite, was booked against Hany Barcelos and got fraud checked and beaten by Hany Barcelos and lost his out at UFC 311 on Saturday, January 18th. Danny Barlow went 6-0 on the regional scene, got a KO win in the contender series, a KO win in his UFC debut, followed up by a decision win in his next fight in the UFC to go 9-0 until he was booked against Sam Patterson and got knocked out by Sam Patterson, and he lost his out at UFC Vegas on Saturday, March 1st. Tatiana Suarez only had 3 fights on the regional scene before she was picked up on The Ultimate Fighter. She went 4 straight wins on The Ultimate Fighter, but obviously only the finale counted, so she ended off as 4-0, followed by 6 straight wins in the UFC to go to 10-0. She managed to get a title fight with Zhang Weili and got dominated in that title fight with Zhang Weili, and she lost her out at UFC 312 on Saturday, February the 8th. Josias Musasa went 7-0 on the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate. He then got a decision win in the contender series and then got booked in his UFC debut and ended up getting submitted in his UFC debut, and he lost his out at UFC Vegas on Saturday, March 15th. Daniel Marcos had a massive 12-fight winning streak on the regional scene, got a win on the contender series to go 13-0, then won 4 of his next 5 fights in the UFC until he was booked against Montel Jackson and lost a decision to Montel Jackson, and he lost his out at UFC Des Moines on Saturday, May 3rd last weekend. Umar Nurmagomedov was hyped up for being the next big thing when it came to Khabib and Makhachev and kind of like the prototype of those guys. He had a massive 10-fight winning streak on the regional scene, got a win in PFL to go to 11-0, and then got another win on the regional scene to go to 12-0 until he went on a 5-fight win streak in the UFC, got a main event against Corey Sandhagen, beat Corey Sandhagen by decision to go 18-0 until he got a title fight against Merab, and he obviously lost a close decision to Merab, and he lost his out UFC 311 on Saturday, January 18th. Magomed Ankalaev had a 7-0 run on the regional scene, got a decision win on the contender series to go to 8-0, won his UFC debut against Brinson Ribeiro to go to 9-0 until he was booked against Bruno Lopez, and he got beaten by decision against Bruno Lopez, and he lost his out at UFC Vegas on Saturday, January 19th. Julius Juicebox Walker was 6-0 on the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, and on 7 days notice he steps in to fight Alonzo Menifield, and he gets beaten by decision against Alonzo Menifield, and he lost his out at UFC Seattle on Saturday, February 22nd. Mig Parkin had a 5-0 run in the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, got a finish on the contender series to earn himself a UFC contract, got 3 straight wins in the UFC before he finished Lucas Brzezinski to cap it off at 10-0 until he was booked against Marcin Tybura, and he lost the decision to Marcin Tybura, and he lost his out at UFC London on Saturday, March 22nd. Gene Matsumoto had a massive 13-fight winning streak on the regional scene until he won his fight in the contender series to go to 14-0, finished his UFC debut to go 15-0, won a decision against Brad Cotton to go 16-0, and was booked to fight Rob Font, and he got beaten by decision against Rob Font to go 16-1, and he lost his out at UFC Seattle on Saturday, February 22nd. Colby Thickness is a training partner of Alexander Volkanovski, and he had a 7-fight winning streak on the regional scene, became a champion in the local scene, and on 7 days notice, he fights Alexandre Topuria, where Volk was in his corner, and Topuria was obviously in his brother's corner, and he ended up losing a decision to Alexandre Topuria to go 7-1, and he lost his out at UFC 312 on Saturday, February the 8th. Ray Saruya had a 6-fight winning streak on the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, then goes over to Road to the UFC, wins 3 more fights, wins his UFC debut against Carlos Hernandez to 10-0, gets booked against Joshua Van, and gets destroyed by Joshua Van to lose his first fight, and he lost his out at UFC 313 on Saturday, March 8th. Sharputin Magomedov had an 11-fight win streak on the regional scene, won his UFC debut by beating Bruno Silva, finished Antonio Tricole, wins a decision against Makal, double spinning back fist KOs on Petrosny to go 15-0, and he was booked to fight MVP, and he lost a decision to MVP, and he lost his out at UFC Saudi Arabia on Saturday, February the 1st. Austin Bashi had a 12-fight win streak on the regional scene, won his fight in the contender series to go 13-0, and his debut was against Christian Rodriguez, where the prospect killer himself beat Austin Bashi by decision, and he lost his out at UFC Vegas on Saturday, January the 11th. Rinya Nakamura had a massive Olympic wrestling career before MMA, went 4 straight wins on the regional scene, went over to Road to the UFC to get 2 more wins, got a finish on his UFC debut, followed by a decision win in his next fight, and he was booked to fight Muin Gafurov, and he got beaten by Muin Gafurov to go 9-1, and he lost his own UFC 311 on Saturday, January 18th. Clayton Carpenter had 5 straight wins on the regional scene, gets a win on the Contender Series by finish, followed by another finish in his UFC debut, followed by a second finish in his second fight in the UFC, and he was booked to fight Tagir Ulanbekov, and he lost his all by losing a decision to Tagir Ulanbekov, and he lost his all at UFC 311 on Saturday, January 18th. Dio Nogajai had a 9-fight win streak on the regional scene, got a KO win in the Contender Series to go to 10-0, and he was booked to fight Brenton Ribeiro in his UFC debut, and he got finished, submitted in the first round by Brenton Ribeiro, and he lost his all at UFC Vegas on Saturday, March 15th. Cody Steele was a bit of a BJJ phenom before MMA, and he started off his MMA career going 6-0, got a KO win in the Contender Series to go 7-0, and his first UFC fight was supposed to be against Rong Zhu, and he lost a decision to Rong Zhu to go 7-1. And he lost his all at UFC 312 on Saturday, February the 8th. Eunice Dubin has a 100% finishing rate on the regional scene where she got 5 straight wins, got a KO win in the Contender Series to go 6-0, and in her first fight in the UFC, she was booked to fight Carly Judas, and she got KO'd in the first round by Carly Judas to go 6-1, and she lost her at UFC Vegas on Saturday, March 15th. But what about the fighters in the UFC right now who are still undefeated and are yet to lose? We've got Ilia Topuria. Now, Ilia Topuria had an 8-fight win streak on the regional scene, won his UFC debut against Yusuf Zalal, finished Damon Jackson, finished Ryan Hall, knocked out Jai Herbert, finished Bryce Mitchell, goes out there in the main event and beats Josh Emmett, and obviously knocks out Alexander Volkanovski to become featherweight champion, defends by knocking out Max Holloway, and he's currently capped at 16-0. Khamzat Chimaev had a 6-fight win streak on the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate, got 4 straight finishes for his first 4 fights in the UFC, going to 10-0, gets a decision win against Gilbert Burns, finishes Kevin Holland to go 12-0, gets a decision win against Kamaru Usman, and then his most recent fight finishes Robert Whittaker to go to 14-0. Shavkat Rakhmonov had a 12-fight win streak on the regional scene, got a finish in his UFC debut, followed up by another finish, with a 100% finishing rate at the time of him being 18-0, and then in his most recent fight, had his first decision, and he picks up his first decision win over Ian Gary to go to 19-0. Movsar Evloev went 10-0 on the regional scene, and when he came over to the UFC, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 straight decisions, and that is currently his record in the UFC as he sits at 19-0. Lerone Murphy went 8-0 on the regional scene, had a draw in his UFC debut, followed by finishing his second fight in the UFC, wins his next 3 fights with a KO in there, going to 12-0. Main event against Edson Barboza, beats him by decision, gets a decision win over Danny Ige to go to 14-0, and he's most recently coming off a main event against Josh Emmett as he beat him by decision to go to 15-0. Michael Morales had an 11-fight win streak on the regional scene, gets a win in the Contender Series to go 12-0, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4 straight wins in the UFC until he gets his main event against Neil Magny, and he KOs Neil Magny to go to 17-0 undefeated. Malcolm Wellmaker went 7-0 on the regional scene, gets a KO win in the Contender Series to go to 8-0, knocks out Cameron Simon in his UFC debut to go to 9-0, and he got a 50k bonus where he's now quit his job as a 9-0 undefeated fighter. Taurus Finney had a career in football before MMA, but when he started MMA, he had 6 straight wins on the regional scene, got a good finish on the Contender Series, followed by a finish on the regional scene, with another finish on the Contender Series, or another win on the Contender Series, against another win on the Contender Series to go to 10-0, and he's coming off a bit of a boring decision win for Robert Valentin as he sits at 11-0. Azamat Murzakanov had 9 straight wins on the regional scene, got a KO win in the Contender Series to go to 10-0, got a KO win in his UFC debut, got a KO win in his second fight in the UFC, gets a decision win over Dustin Jacoby to go to 13-0, and he's coming off a KO over Alonzo Menifield to go to 14-0, and he was supposed to fight Nikita Krylov, but that fight got cancelled because Azamat Murzakanov got popped for steroids. Umar Sy went 9-0 on the regional scene, wins his UFC debut by finish, and gets a decision win in his second fight in the UFC, and he's currently at 11-0. Lonnie Kavanagh went 6-0 on the regional scene, gets a KO win in the Contender Series to progress to 7-0, followed up by 1 and 2 wins in the UFC to go to 9-0 undefeated. Aliakab Kizriev went 12-0 on the regional scene, got a KO win in that, got a finish on the Contender Series to go to 13-0, got a submission win in his UFC debut to go to 14-0, and had a no contest against Muradov in his second fight in the UFC, and he's been out ever since at 14-0. Hamdi Abdelwahab was a former Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler who had 3 fights on the regional scene, and he did win his UFC debut against Dontel Mayes, but that got overturned because he took steroids, so he went back down to 3-0, but he's coming off a good win over Jamal Pogues in his most recent fight to sit back at 4-0. Rafael Estevam. Rafael Estevam won 10 fights on the regional scene, got a good finish on the contender series to go to 11-0, won his UFC debut by decision, and won his most recent fight in the UFC by decision as well, as he sits at 13-0 undefeated. Farid Basharat. Now, Farid Basharat's known for being the brother of Javid Basharat, who was also at once undefeated, but he's no longer undefeated. He went 8-0 on the regional scene, did Farid Basharat, followed up by winning the contender series, then 1, 2, 3, 4 straight wins in the UFC as of now, as he sits at 13-0. Nurullah Aliyev. Now, this lookalike of Khabib had 7 straight wins on the regional scene, got a finish on the contender series to go to 8-0, and won his UFC debut by decision as well to go to 9-0. Took 2 years off the sport, and is coming off a good win this year, a decision win this year, as he sits at 10-0 undefeated. Andre Lima. Andre Lima won 6 straight fights on the regional scene, gets a good win on the contender series to get a UFC contract, got bitten in his UFC debut, which obviously got overturned to a disqualification where he got the win there. Won his next fight after that, won his next fight after that, and he's coming off a submission win over Daniel Perez as he sits at 11-0 undefeated. Haider Emil. Haider Emil went 7-0 on the regional scene, got a good win on the contender series to go to 8-0, got a KO win to get another win, got a KO win to get another win, and he's coming off a decision win over William Gomez as he sits at 11-0 undefeated. And that is every UFC undefeated fighter to lose in 2025, as well as every current undefeated fighter in the UFC. Let me know who you think is going to be the next fighter to lose their Raw. Thank you for watching.